This is the Radio Hour, listeners. Welcome to a tale of secrets, deception, and the inescapable consequences of running from the past. Tonight, we ask you, what would you do if the life you built, the woman you love, the future you dreamed of, was threatened by a single person who knows your darkest truth? Our story explores a man who ran for 2 years. He changed his name, he changed his identity, he found love, built a new life, and was about to marry a rich man's daughter. Then someone found him and said 5 words that destroyed everything. Our mystery tonight began with a simple code, 5 numbers, 3-5-4-1-06-3. A man received these numbers in an envelope. No letter, no explanation, just 5 numbers that meant nothing to anyone but him. The moment he saw those numbers, the color drained from his face. His hands trembled, because he knew with absolute certainty that only one person in the world could have written those numbers, a person from his old life, a person he had worked with in prison, a person who knew exactly who he was and where he was hiding. But why send numbers? What did they mean? And most importantly, who was watching him? The year is 1968, and our story begins not with revelation, but with dread. 20 years. That is how long Charles Robert Hagan spent in prison for a murder he did not commit. He was innocent, he was convicted, he was sentenced to life. At 22 years old, with a court-appointed attorney who did not care to investigate, Charles was sent to San Quentin. His conviction was based on circumstantial evidence, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A jury's reasonable doubt was insufficient. Justice failed. But Charles did not spend his entire life in prison. One day, opportunity presented itself, an accident, a moment of chaos, a possibility. He took it, he ran. For 2 years after his escape, Charles lived in the shadows. No identification, no job that required paperwork, no connections to his past. He was a ghost, a man who officially no longer existed. Then in 1967, something unexpected happened. A man was found burned to death in a flophouse fire. The body was so badly charred that identification seemed impossible. But there was one item on the body, one possession that provided clarity. A locket, old, cheap gold plate. Completely unremarkable except for one detail. Inscribed on the back were the names of 2 people, the man's parents and the woman's maiden name before she married. The same names carved into a locket that Charles Robert Hagan had treasured since childhood, the only possession he had kept through his years of poverty, through his years in prison, through the first years of his freedom. A locket he had lost years ago while sleeping in a freight car. A locket stolen by a thief who saw only cheap metal and possible profit. The authorities matched the inscription. They closed the file on Robert Hagan. The escaped convict was dead, burned beyond recognition, but dead nonetheless. Charles Robert Hagan officially ceased to exist, and in his place a new man was born, a man with a new name, a man with a chance at redemption. "13 years passed, 13 years of careful living, 13 years of building a life that seemed legitimate, respectable, and permanent. Charles became an editor, a professional man, a man who worked in publishing and wore suits and conducted himself with dignity and purpose. He met a woman. She was beautiful, intelligent, kind. He fell in love, and she fell in love with him. He proposed, she accepted. They began to plan their wedding. Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed possible. Charles had done what so few men can do. He had escaped his past. He had become someone new. He had earned redemption through the simple act of living well, or so he believed. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Charles arrived at his office. His assistant informed him that a visitor had arrived, a man, rough around the edges, refusing to give his name or his business, insisting that he would speak only to Charles. Charles was suspicious but professional. He agreed to see the man. The visitor was perhaps 50 years old, with the bearing of someone who had spent years confined. Prison changes a man. It marks him in ways that clothing and grooming cannot conceal. Charles recognized the signs immediately because he bore them himself. The man smiled, not a warm smile, but a knowing smile. The smile of someone holding a secret. "Don't you recognize me, Charlie?" the man asked. Charles studied the face. Something stirred in his memory. A face from San Quentin, a cellmate from years past, a man named Clint. "Clint," Charles said carefully, "I didn't expect to see you." "No," Clint replied, sitting in the chair across from Charles's desk without being invited. "I suppose you didn't, but I've been watching you for a long time, ever since I got out of the pen 3 years ago." "Watching me? Why?" Clint reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. On it were written 5 numbers, 3-5-4-106-3. "Do these numbers mean anything to you, Charlie?" Charles felt the blood drain from his face. His hands trembled as he reached for the paper. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the safe deposit box I shared with another inmate. Years ago, before I got released. He told me these numbers were important. He told me they were my insurance policy if I ever needed leverage." "Clint, I don't understand what you want." "Don't you?" "These numbers, Charlie. These are the numbers you used during the jobs. The jobs before you got caught. The jobs that put you in San Quentin for the murder you didn't commit. But you and I both know you committed plenty of other crimes." Charles said nothing. The past was resurfacing. The part he had buried so deeply he had almost convinced himself it never existed. "I want money," Clint continued. "A lot of money. And I want it by the end of the week." "How much?" Charles asked. $5,000. That should be manageable for a man in your position. And if I refuse? Then I contact the authorities. I tell them about the safe deposit box. I tell them about the crimes. I tell them that Charles Powell is actually Robert Hagan. I tell them that you escaped from San Quentin. And I tell them that you were never the reformed man you pretended to be. Charles understood with perfect clarity that his carefully constructed life was collapsing. "I need time to think," Charles said. "You have until Friday," Clint replied, standing up and walking toward the door. "Then I make my calls." And so Charles's world, which had seemed so stable, so secure, so permanent, began to crumble. That evening, Charles sat alone in his apartment, staring at the 5 numbers on the piece of paper. 3-5-4-106-3. Safe deposit box, Bank of San Francisco. Box number 106. The key code 3-5-4-3. A code that unlocked not just a box, but his entire past. Charles had known about this box. His cellmate, years ago, had mentioned it, but Charles had never accessed it. He had tried to forget it existed. Now he was forced to confront the reality that the past never truly stays buried. It waits, it watches, it has patience. Charles faced a terrible choice. He could pay the blackmail, give Clint the $5,000, and hope that Clint kept his word. But could a man like Clint keep his word? Would he come back for more money? Would he ever be satisfied? Or Charles could refuse to pay. He could go to the authorities himself. He could confess his true identity, his escape, his crimes. He could face justice, even though he had already paid for the crime he did not commit. But that would mean prison again. That would mean losing his job, his reputation, the woman he loved, the future he had built. There seemed to be no good choice, only choices that led to ruin. As Charles sat in the darkness of his apartment, he heard a key in the lock. His fiancée entered. She was beautiful, as she always was. She smiled at him, unaware of the chaos unfolding in his mind. "Hello, darling," she said. "How was your day?" Charles looked at her face and made a decision. He could not tell her, not yet. Not until he had resolved this impossible situation. Fine, he lied. It was fine. The next morning, Charles did something he hadn't done in 13 years. He began to investigate his own past. He contacted a friend, a man he knew from work, a man he had never spoken to about his past, but a man he suspected had connections in law enforcement. "I need to know about a man," Charles said carefully. "His name is Clint. He was released from prison 3 years ago. I need to know where he is. I need to know if he has been convicted of any crime since his release." His friend looked at Charles with suspicion, but agreed to help. Within 2 days, Charles had his answer. Clint had indeed been released from San Quentin 3 years prior, and last week, Clint had been arrested for aggravated assault. He had beaten a man in a bar and left him unconscious. He was currently in custody. His bail hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Charles suddenly understood what was happening. Clint needed money for bail. That was why he was blackmailing Charles. That was why he needed $5,000, or whatever amount Charles would give him, to secure his release from jail. Charles faced yet another choice. He could ignore Clint's demands. He could wait and see if Clint followed through on his threat from prison. Or Charles could use this information to his advantage. He could help Clint by posting bail. He could make Clint believe that Charles was complying with his demands. He could buy time. But what would happen when Clint got out? Would the blackmail continue? Would Clint demand more money? Would Charles find himself trapped in an endless cycle of payment and fear? That evening, Charles made a decision. He would tell his fiancée the truth. He sat with her in their home and he told her everything. About San Quentin, about his wrongful conviction, about the escape, about the 13 years of hiding. He told her about Clint, about the 5 numbers, about the blackmail. He told her that he was not who she thought he was, that his name was not Charles Powell, that his entire life had been a carefully constructed deception. His fiancée listened. She did not speak. She did not interrupt. She simply listened. When Charles finished speaking, she asked him one question. "Do you love me?" "Yes," Charles said, "more than anything in this world." "Then we will face this together," she replied. "We will find a solution." But Charles knew there was no good solution, only bad choices and worse choices. On Monday, Charles stood outside the courthouse where Clint's bail hearing was taking place. He had money. He had prepared $5,000 in cash. He had decided that he would post Clint's bail. He would give Clint the money and hope that it would be enough. He would hope that Clint would disappear. He would hope that the blackmail would end. But as Charles stood in the hallway, he saw a man approaching, a man in a suit, a man with the bearing of a detective or lawyer. The man introduced himself as Detective George Hamilton. He said he wanted to speak with Charles about his connection to Clint. Charles's heart seized. His secret was being discovered by the authorities, not through Clint's blackmail, but through official investigation. "I'm investigating Clint's assault case," Detective Hamilton explained. "I understand you may have had contact with him recently." Yes," Charles admitted carefully. "He came to see me at my office." "What did he want?" Charles faced yet another impossible choice. He could lie. He could claim that Clint was asking for employment, or help, or something innocuous. Or Charles could tell the truth and risk exposing his entire past. In that moment, Charles understood something profound. There was no hiding place. There was no escape. The past always catches up. The truth always emerges. "He was blackmailing me," Charles said quietly. Detective Hamilton's expression shifted. "Why would he blackmail you?" "Because I'm not who I said I was," Charles replied. "My real name is Robert Hagan. I escaped from San Quentin 13 years ago. I've been living under an assumed identity. Detective Hamilton's face registered shock, then understanding. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me, the detective said. In the interrogation room, Charles told Detective Hamilton everything. He told him about his wrongful conviction, about the escape, about Clint, about the blackmail, about his plan to pay the money. Detective Hamilton listened carefully. Here's the interesting thing, the detective said when Charles finished. We've been investigating Clint for a pattern of crimes: assault, extortion, intimidation. And you're not his first victim. He's been blackmailing multiple people, using information he obtained while in prison. What will happen to me? Charles asked. That depends. Your escape from San Quentin was illegal. That's a crime. However, your original conviction was based on faulty evidence. Given the circumstances, I believe a case could be made that you've served your time, emotionally and psychologically, if not legally. So I'm going back to prison. Not necessarily. I'm going to speak with the district attorney. I'm going to present the evidence that your original conviction was potentially wrongful. I'm going to recommend that your escape be considered a consequence of judicial error, not criminal intent, but I can't promise anything. Charles nodded. He understood that his fate was now in the hands of the justice system that had failed him once before. Six months later, Charles stood in a courthouse once again. This time, however, the outcome was different. The district attorney, after reviewing the evidence from Charles's original trial, determined that significant judicial errors had been made. The evidence against him had been circumstantial. His attorney had been incompetent. He had been wrongfully convicted. Charles's conviction was overturned. His escape from prison, while technically illegal, was deemed a consequence of judicial failure rather than criminal intent. He would not face additional prison time. However, Charles faced one more decision. He could reclaim his original identity, Robert Hagan. He could attempt to rebuild his life as his true self. Or he could maintain his false identity, Charles Powell, and continue the life he had built. In the end, Charles made a surprising choice. He reclaimed his name. He became Robert Hagan once again. But he also maintained his career, his reputation, his life. He married his fiancée, not as Charles Powell, but as Robert Hagan. He explained his true story. She accepted him, knowing the full truth of who he was and what he had endured. As for Clint, he was convicted of extortion, assault, and intimidation. He returned to prison. Robert Hagan, once Charles Powell, emerged from this ordeal, transformed. He had learned that there truly is no hiding place from the past. The truth always emerges. Justice, though delayed and imperfect, eventually prevails. And so the mystery of no hiding place came to rest, not with answers, but with acceptance. Robert had learned that some secrets are too heavy to carry, some truths are too important to hide, and some forms of justice, though unconventional, offer their own kind of redemption. And so concludes our tale of blackmail, identity, and the power of truth to set us free. What is the truth of no hiding place, listeners? Was Robert Hagan guilty of the crime he was convicted for? Was he guilty of the crimes he committed before his conviction? Is redemption truly possible? Perhaps the answer matters less than the journey itself. Perhaps the real mystery is not what Charles Powell hid, but what Robert Hagan revealed. Thank you for spending this evening with us on the Radio Hour. What was your favorite moment? What did you make of Robert's choice? Did he make the right decision? Please, dear listeners, Share your thoughts in the comments. Your comments mean everything to us. And if you have found yourself captivated by this evening's broadcast, please like this video. Subscribe to the Radio Hour so that you never miss a mystery. Enable notifications. Share this broadcast with friends and family who appreciate classic storytelling. The Radio Hour returns every week with new mysteries, new stories, new questions that challenge our understanding of justice, identity, and redemption. Until then, we bid you farewell, dear listeners. Sleep well if you can, but I suspect that tonight you will find sleep elusive. You will lie awake in the darkness, thinking about Robert Hagan, thinking about the choices he made, thinking about the question that has no easy answer. When is the truth worth the cost? This has been the Radio Hour. Thank you for listening.